Second World War was over. The world had witnessed unprecedented destruction and loss of life. Cities lay in ruins and nations were grappling with the aftermath of a conflict that had reshaped the global landscape. Victory was hard won, but the world was in ruins. The scars of war were visible everywhere, from the bombed-out buildings to the displaced populations struggling to rebuild their lives. From the ashes of this conflict, a new struggle emerged. Nations began to rise again like a phoenix from the flames. But this time the battle was not fought with weapons of war. This was not a war of tanks and troops, but of ideas. It was a battle for influence, for the hearts and minds of people across the globe. Ideologies clashed as nations sought to assert their dominance in a rapidly changing world. It was the Cold War, a period marked by intense rivalry and competition between two superpowers, each determined to shape the future according to their vision. On one side stood the United States, a champion of democracy and capitalism. Under the leadership of President Truman, America sought to promote freedom and economic prosperity. On the other, the Soviet Union, promoting communism and a centrally controlled economy. Led by Joseph Stalin, the USSR aimed to spread its ideology and influence across the globe. These two superpowers, recent allies against Nazi Germany, were now locked in a global standoff. The camaraderie of wartime had given way to suspicion and rivalry. The Cold War was a clash of ideologies, a battle for the hearts and minds of people worldwide. Propaganda became a powerful tool as each side sought to win support and undermine the other. It was a time of suspicion, fear, and uncertainty. The threat of nuclear war loomed large, casting a shadow over daily life and fueling paranoia. Yet it was also a time of incredible technological advancement and cultural change. The space race, the rise of television, and the birth of rock and roll all unfolded against the backdrop of this ideological struggle, shaping the world in ways that still resonate today. The seeds of the Cold War were sown even before the guns fell silent in World War II. The devastation and destruction left behind by the war created a power vacuum and a struggle for dominance among the victorious nations. In 1945, at the Yalta Conference, the Allied leaders met to discuss the post-war order. Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin gathered to shape the future of a war-torn world, each with their own agendas and visions for peace. The Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, sought to establish a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. Stalin aimed to create a buffer zone of friendly governments to protect the Soviet Union from future invasions, ensuring Soviet security and spreading communist ideology. The United States, under President Franklin D. Roosevelt, pushed for self-determination for all nations. Roosevelt envisioned a world where nations could choose their own paths, free from external domination, promoting democracy and economic cooperation. These conflicting visions created a rift. The ideological divide between the Soviet Union's communism and the United States' capitalism and democracy became increasingly apparent, leading to tensions and mistrust. As Soviet influence spread across Eastern Europe, a metaphorical Iron Curtain descended, dividing the continent. This Iron Curtain symbolized the ideological and physical separation between the communist East and the capitalist West. This division marked the beginning of the Cold War. The world was now split into two opposing camps, each vying for global influence and power, setting the stage for decades of political, military, and economic rivalry. The Iron Curtain was more than just a line on a map. It was a stark reality for millions of people. Families were divided, cut off from loved ones by barbed wire and concrete. In the East, life under communist rule meant strict government control. Freedom of speech was limited, and dissent was often met with harsh consequences. The West, meanwhile, enjoyed greater freedoms and economic prosperity. Nowhere was this division more stark than in Berlin. The city, divided by the Berlin Wall, became a symbol of the Cold War's stark realities. The Cold War rivalry extended beyond Earth's atmosphere, sparking a race into space. Both superpowers poured resources into rocket technology and space exploration. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. This achievement sent shockwaves through the United States, igniting the space race. The competition culminated in 1969 when American astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon. The moon landing was a triumph for the United States and a testament to human ingenuity. Section 5. Proxy wars. Battlegrounds of ideology. While the superpowers never directly confronted each other, they waged proxy wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan. These conflicts became battlegrounds for Cold War ideologies, with devastating consequences. In these proxy wars, the United States and the Soviet Union supported opposing sides, providing weapons, training, and funding. These conflicts caused immense suffering and left a lasting legacy of political instability. Section 6. Korea, a nation divided. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953 was the first major proxy war of the Cold War. Korea, divided after World War II, became a battleground for communist North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, and democratic South Korea, backed by the United States and its allies. The war ended in a stalemate, with the country still divided today. The Korean War demonstrated the devastating human cost of Cold War tensions. Section 7. Vietnam, a jungle battlefield. The Vietnam War, lasting from the 1950s to 1975, was another tragic chapter in the Cold War. The United States intervened to support South Vietnam against the communist North Vietnamese and their Viet Cong allies. The war became deeply unpopular in the United States, with growing protests against the conflict. The images of the war, broadcast into homes across the world, helped turn public opinion against the conflict. Section 8. Afghanistan, the bear trap. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan seeking to prop up a communist government. The United States, supporting Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen, poured weapons and resources into the conflict. The Afghan war proved to be a costly misadventure for the Soviet Union. The conflict drained resources and exposed weaknesses in the Soviet system. Section 9. Beyond the battlefield, hearts and minds. The Cold War was not just fought with bombs and bullets, it was also a battle for hearts and minds, a struggle for cultural and ideological dominance. Both sides used propaganda, espionage, and cultural exchanges to influence global opinion. From Hollywood films to radio broadcasts, the Cold War permeated every aspect of life. Section 10. Détente, a thaw in the Cold War. By the 1970s, a thaw began to set in. Both sides, exhausted by decades of confrontation, began to explore paths to peaceful coexistence. This period of détente saw arms control agreements and increased dialogue between the superpowers. While tensions remained, there was a sense that the world had stepped back from the brink. Section 11. A wall crumbles, an empire falls, an end of an era. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, a moment that resonated around the globe. This wall, which had stood as a stark symbol of division between East and West, was finally coming down. The scenes of jubilation and relief were broadcast worldwide, capturing the hearts and minds of millions. It was a symbol of Cold War division crumbling before the world's eyes. Families and friends, long separated by this concrete barrier, were reunited in emotional embraces. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not just a physical demolition, but a powerful metaphor for the end of an era of ideological conflict. This momentous event signaled the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. In 1991, the world witnessed another historic moment as the Soviet Union itself dissolved. The once mighty superpower, which had been a central player in the Cold War, was no more. The Soviet Union itself dissolved, marking a significant shift in global power dynamics. The lowering of the Soviet flag was a poignant moment, symbolizing the end of an era that had shaped the world for nearly half a century. Marking the end of the Cold War, this period saw world leaders coming together, shaking hands and forging new alliances. The remnants of the Berlin Wall became a powerful reminder of the past, while the world looked forward to a future of cooperation and peace. The world breathed a collective sigh of relief. The end of the Cold War brought hope and a renewed sense of possibility. People around the globe celebrated the newfound peace, and there was a palpable sense of optimism in the air. The long standoff was over. The decades of tension, marked by military standoffs and the ever-present threat of nuclear war, had finally come to an end. The world could now move forward, free from the shadow of imminent conflict. The Cold War left an indelible mark on the world, shaping global politics, economics, and culture for decades. The end of this era brought about significant changes as nations adjusted to a new world order. Economies transformed, cultures evolved, and the global political landscape was forever altered. It was a time of great peril, but also incredible innovation and resilience. The Cold War era saw remarkable advancements in technology and science, driven by the competition between superpowers. Communities around the world demonstrated resilience, adapting to the challenges and uncertainties of the time. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, the lessons of the Cold War remain as relevant as ever. The importance of diplomacy, the dangers of ideological extremism, and the value of international cooperation are lessons that continue to guide us today. The lessons of the Cold War remain as relevant as ever. By studying this pivotal period in history, we can better understand the challenges we face today and work towards a more peaceful and cooperative world. The end of the Cold War was not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a new chapter in human history.